you very much. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. At this time, I'd like to call to order the regular board meeting of the North County Transit District for May 19th, 2022. Before we begin, members of the public who may be viewing this meeting on the district's YouTube page should note that in order to make a public comment during the meeting, you must connect using the Zoom link provided on the agenda. In addition, you must register to speak by sending an email containing your name and/or phone number and the agenda item on which you wish to speak to clerk@nctd.org. Anthony Flores, clerk of the board, will now call the roll.
Yes, ma'am. Board Member Rodriguez.
Here.
Board Member Hinsey.
Here.
Board Member Contreras.
Present.
Board Member Morosco.
Present.
Board Member Desmond. Board Member Gastelum.
Here.
Board Chair Edson.
Present.
Board Member Jenkins.
Here.
Board Vice Chair Bapatal.
Here.
Board Member Whitburn. That is the roll call, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Anthony. Board Member Contreras, would you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Yes. All right. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Anthony, will you now provide a safety brief and review evacuation procedures?
Yes, ma'am. For those of us here in the building, in the event of an emergency, I will dial 911. In the event of an evacuation, please exit the building using the stairs. Do not use the elevators. Once clear of the building, please do not re-enter unless told to do so by emergency personnel. We have fire alarms and fire extinguishers located on each floor of this building. We also have a portable defibrillator located on the first floor and staff on hand trained in CPR procedures. That concludes my safety brief, ma'am.
Thank you. Do we have any changes to the agenda?
We do not, ma'am.
Okay, great. Next on our agenda is public communications. Anthony, do we have any public comments today?
We do not, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Before we proceed, I have a couple quick protocol items to share. First, I ask that board members please hold comments and questions until after each agenda item has been presented. Second, when the time comes for board member questions and comments, please use the raise hand function and wait until you're called upon to speak. We have one presentation today. Chris Orlando, our Chief of Planning, Marketing, and Communications, will introduce this item.
Thank you very much, Chair Edson. If the board recalls at its September 16th, 2021 meeting, the board approved an agreement with Deloitte Consulting to conduct a comprehensive market research and analysis project to assist the district in its efforts to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic and to really understand what the post-pandemic marketplace looks like for transit. So here today with us is Anant Dinamani from Deloitte, who he is their Future of Mobility project leader, and Ben Campano, who's our project lead, team lead for the Deloitte effort. Just a note for the board, this is meant as an introductory session for the Deloitte project. It is quite a lengthy project, so we will be doing brief presentations at the next couple board meetings to provide the board real in-depth overview of what the Deloitte project is about. So today's presentation is intended as an introduction to the project. So with that, I'll turn it over to Anant and the Deloitte team for the presentation.
Thank you so much, Chris. Appreciate it. Just a quick question in terms of controlling the slides here. Yeah.
I will drive the presentation.
Okay, thank you so much. If you don't mind going to the next slide, please. So firstly, I want to thank the board, its members, and NCTD's leadership team for giving us an opportunity to serve the district and kind of help in kind of thinking through kind of where mobility and transportation is headed. So thank you for that. Really appreciate and humbled by the opportunity we have here. My name is Anand Dinamani. I lead Deloitte's Future Mobility and Government and Public Services Transportation practice, and have been in the space for about a decade. I started my career with automotive companies and realized that in order to deliver on the promise of future mobility, which we strongly believe in, which is to make mobility safer, cheaper, cleaner, and more accessible and more equitable, it was important that we kind of double down on our work with governments and public services agencies, which we're honored to be kind of working with you all in pioneering an approach here, which is new to the industry, and kind of working together on it. As part of kind of our work, one of the methods that we resorted to as far as delivering on this promise was putting together intermodal systems that allowed for residents, commuters, to be able to transition from different modes of transportation seamlessly, while creating choices in ways that didn't affect equity and in fact advanced access and connectivity to vulnerable communities. This was about 6 years ago. We worked with the World Economic Forum. We launched an effort, a global effort on this topic in terms of designing a seamless integrated mobility system and kind of how that comes to life. And as an output of a lot of the work and that we learned, we actually did at that time work with Sandag in helping them envision the concept of NextOS in the region. One of the key learnings that we noticed as part of our effort was the key learning here is transformation is really necessary in terms of kind of how governmental processes have to evolve, and a regional approach for how transformation can be delivered. No one agency can really pull this off. It requires collaboration and new methods and new processes that have to institutionalize to do it. And so since our work, we have been working across the country and globally in kind of thinking about how to advance regional collaboration to bring integrated platforms that can hopefully solve for the challenges we're facing. Go to the next slide, please. It probably doesn't surprise anyone that in the last several years, transportation planning and management is become one of the most complex elements of how peoples and communities are connected. We have the challenge of infrastructures that's aging. We have the challenge of how movement patterns have evolved, both for people and goods. And the pandemic, in fact, made it even more complex. And in the midst of all of this, equity, climate, community, and public health concerns have been a huge challenge. So therefore, the approach for transportation management must evolve, which should not surprise any of you, and which also really ties into the work that we are trying to do with NCTD. Go to the next slide, please. Our effort and collaboration with NCTD leadership team really started on the backs of our thought that we put out there on the backs of the pandemic. All credit to the leadership team to give us an opportunity to come speak to them about how we saw the scenarios unfold at that time. The pandemic was it really has changed a lot about how we work, how we procure goods, and that in itself has kind of disrupted the networks, transportation networks specifically in the way they existed. And there's a lot of questions around how do you evolve the networks from this point on in ways that advance both economic and equity outcomes that regions are trying to achieve. We had portrayed 4 different scenarios for kind of where we see the world headed, and that will tie really well with the scenario analysis that we're doing with NCTD, which my colleague Ben Capano will be giving a quick overview of as soon as I'm finished here. Go to the next slide, please. One of the things that we're noticing, and which is also a big kind of guideline and principle for how we are doing this work with you all, is we are focused on not just kind of working along the constraints of what you have today, but really thinking about how processes need to be reinvented. As you can imagine, for the longest time, the processes that have existed have been around, physical infrastructure and putting transportation networks in place, which, took several years to plan and decades to implement. And what's happened with digitization of transportation, ride sharing, and a lot of the technology that's coming our way is, we have an opportunity to work in shorter cycles. So we believe that one of the biggest things that regions and agencies such as yourselves have to evolve to is both near-term and long-term approaches, which means your planning models have to support both near and long-term approaches. We go to the next slide, please. And what does near-term mean? We believe that at its core, it's about serving the resident. As part of our work with you all, one of the things that we are doing is working with local players, local nonprofits like Circle at San Diego, and we're engaging with the community. We believe that at its core, it's about understanding what residents want, how their needs are evolving. With one, understanding hyperlocal needs. Every neighborhood, every community is different. So understanding what challenges they're facing and how you do it. Applying data science and artificial intelligence technologies to forecast how those needs are going to be supported, affecting the transportation network. Providing hyperlocal solutions that you can measure the value of in shorter cycles, and therefore creating an iterative loop, which goes back to the comment that I made on the previous slide, where you can use technology and data science and advancements that we made in artificial intelligence to be able to run shorter cycles in terms of how planning is done. And this methodology that I'm talking about here is something we are actually pioneering and implementing here with partnership with NCTD, and I'm really excited about kind of talking through all of the work here in the coming months. If you go to the next slide, please. Alongside the data science effort, what is also necessary is regional integration. We need regional leadership, which kind of brings collaborative models together. We recognize that the local kind of transportation governance is federated. It evolved over decades of how transportation planning was done and executed. However, in the digitization and the digital world that we're living in, it does require integration in different ways. Doesn't mean that the agency's roles are going to change tremendously, but how you work and how you operate does have to evolve. And for that, we need a regional leader. The roles may evolve a little bit in terms of kind of where we see the future headed. We do see the transit role evolving a little bit from provider of public transportation to being an orchestrator and convener of public transportation and transportation modes largely. For instance, we see the role of potentially an MPO evolving into a data science organization and providing, data science as a service for the region. So there are several models that we are testing out nationally for where and how the agency roles evolve. And finally, funding and creating methods in which that sustain solutions and how solutions are deployed. And we have a once in a lifetime opportunity with what IIJ is offering to us. Go to the next slide, please. So that was kind of our very quick nutshell summary of kind of where we see the world headed, where we see the opportunity. And again, I want to echo that we are humbled by the opportunity that we have here to serve NCTD. My colleague Ben here will talk a little bit about how we're applying the learnings and the trends that we're seeing in the market to the work that we're trying to do with NCTD in the district in shaping kind of the scenarios that you should all be prepared for. With that, Ben.
Awesome. Thank you, Anant. Thank you, Chris, and thank you to the rest of the board for having us today. Excited to be here. So we all know that COVID has caused a really fundamental shift in transportation and lifestyle patterns, right? Presenting what we think of as an inflection point for transit agencies and specifically NCTD. We also know that the pandemic presented, specific operational and rider acquisition and retention challenges for the district. And during this time, we've seen privatized transport become more popular, as well as a dramatic shift in consumer commuting behavior and other travel patterns. But I would be remiss in discussing the impacts of COVID and the challenges that NCTD has faced during this time if we didn't also discuss that we believe this is an opportunity for the district to really innovate and provide an enhanced transit experience to residents in North County. And that's what we're excited about. So that's our goal for this project. Next slide, please. So what we're doing, we have been working with NCTD leaders since October, and this project is going to be a year long, and we're doing a couple of things, and we have some outcomes that we're working towards. So the overall goal of the project is to find strategies to increase ridership. And understanding that we don't necessarily know what the future holds, and I'll talk a little bit more about what scenarios we're creating are, but we wanted to find some possible future versions of the world, and then from there, identify strategies for NCTD to improve the experience, increase ridership in each of those. But along with that, we also are doing on the ground community engagement, which we're really excited about and that Anant alluded to. We're identifying different personas of people in North County and assessing what are their transportation needs, where do they live, where are they going, how can we make sure they have access to transportation. We're also testing the performance of NCTD's existing strategies in our Futurescape modeling simulation tool, which we'll talk a little bit more about later as well. And then, lastly, kind of bringing all these together at the end of this project, we'll have some strategies that we believe the district can take to increase ridership over a 5-year timeline. Again, kind of going back to what Anant was talking about around our beliefs of transportation planning and how it's important at this juncture to include some near-term approaches with the traditional kind of longer term. Next slide, please. Okay, so we've structured our project into 6 distinct activities, the first of which is just ongoing program management, but I'll step through each of these. Task 2 is a current state assessment that we performed in the fall. The goal of this really being to understand and document NCTD's current challenges and operating restraints and constraints within which they have to operate. And then as part of this, also looking at some of the regional trends and COVID recovery from an economic standpoint that's happened in North County over the past couple of years and where those are going. Task 3 is strategic scenario planning. So we took the research that we found through the current state assessment and we documented a series of what we're calling uncertain forces that are impacting the district's ability to operate. So these are things anywhere from work from home policy adoption to the cost of personal vehicle ownership to funding that's available for transit. These are uncertain forces that we don't necessarily know what they'll look like in 5 years. So the part of the scenario planning process is taking these and building different narratives of the future and then saying, okay, what is the impact to a transit agency in this future and specifically NCTD's ability to gain and retain riders and provide service. So we see scenario planning as pretty different from maybe traditional forecast planning, where you're trying to pick one version of the future and guess what that's going to be. We're defining 4 versions of the future and then seeing which strategies might work to increase ridership, attract people to transit in each of those 4. In task 4, human-centered design, this is where we're doing the community engagement. So we're really excited to be working with Circulate San Diego, a trusted local nonprofit who has experience conducting surveys with North County residents. We're going to be asking a lot of questions and collecting a lot of data about post-COVID mobility trends, needs, commuting patterns, leisure travel patterns, and then, as I mentioned previously, defining these personas of what are the different types of needs and travelers in North County, and how might they be 5 years in the future using NCTD services or maybe other modes. Task 5 is where we're doing some quantitative modeling and analysis. So I mentioned our Deloitte's proprietary Futurescape tool. This is a simulation tool that's able to build a digital twin of the region, in this case, North County, and simulate NCTD's existing network and frequency policies, fares, to determine what might ridership look like in the future. So we're going to be running some simulations with current strategies for each of the 4 scenarios. And then we're also going to be testing some new possible strategies or frequencies, policies that the district could implement to see what the difference is in ridership and what might work. And then we'll bring this all together in task 6 for a 5-year strategic roadmap, where we'll be identifying each of the strategies that we believe are really going to attract people back to transit services post-COVID or be the most effective. Next slide, please. From a status standpoint, we've already completed the current state assessment and the scenario planning tasks, which we're excited about. So we're currently in the midst of spinning up the community engagement work with Circulate San Diego, as well as the Futurescape modeling work. And we're expecting those to finish by the end of July. And then our final deliverable report on our findings will be available to NCTD and the board at the end of September. Next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit more about what we're doing qualitatively and quantitatively to make sure we have a robust set of inputs into this project. So from the qualitative standpoint, we've had a lot of interviews. So we've spoken with a lot of the NCTD chief leadership, several board members, as well as leaders in the community. So this is anyone from city council members to school districts, universities, major demand generators in the San Diego County area, and some real estate developers as well, to understand what has their experience been with NCTD in the past, what do they expect from the district in the future, and what are the needs of their constituents or customers. So that's a critical input to kind of the recommendations that we'll be providing. We had a scenario planning lab, which was very helpful for our process. Board member Contreras was also generous enough to come and attend that and give her perspective, which is great. As part of this, we brought together leaders in the region for an in-person workshop to talk about these uncertain forces and really make sure that we have the proper list. That's the things that are top of mind for leaders in the region in terms of bringing people back after COVID to services, as well as the operational challenges that we have as well. And then the last note there on the left, best practices from peer transit agencies. So we've looked at probably about 50 other transit agencies in the US and worldwide, actually, to see what strategies have they taken since COVID to improve the service and to make it a safe environment for people to return. And we're continuing to monitor those strategies or leading practices that other agencies have implemented, just to see what has worked in other places, understanding that, whatever recommendations we provide as part of this are going to be hyper specific to the people of North County. And then on the quantitative side, we've looked at NCTD's performance data that's been available, ridership data, as well as some of the challenges with operations since COVID there. And then from a regional standpoint, we have some mode choice data, COVID era recovery data from some adjacent industries. So we're looking at what has retail foot traffic been like, what has real estate or maybe parking patterns been like, traffic, of course, and then air travel, tourism, some other things that are important inputs into transportation planning. And then also demographic data. So looking at where are people living currently, where are our main riders living currently, and where are people that might consider taking transit, just from a network standpoint, and also a future kind of marketing, customer acquisition. How do we make sure we're providing services to people in the places where they need them? Next slide, please. Yeah, so I want to talk a little bit about what we found during the current state assessment, and I want to caveat this is certainly not the full list of what we found during the current state assessment. We have a lot more detail on this in a full kind of report that you can work with Matt Tucker or maybe Chris Orlando to see if you're interested in learning more. But just want to touch on a couple of these quickly. So the operator shortage, we understand that is a hugely impacting challenge as COVID continues, having enough operators to specifically for Breeze to run the service. That has impacts on public perception of transit reliability. So that will be a critical part of kind of what we're thinking about in the 5-year timeline. How do we attract operators back to the district, or have a service that that we can run reliably? And then also just perceptions of transit safety. So this definitely has COVID impacts. Obviously as the pandemic started, people were weary of being in public places. So how do you kind of combat that going forward post-COVID? And then from a stakeholder insights perspective, we had a lot of those conversations internally and externally in the region. I would say in general, there was a lot of excitement from a lot of the potential partners we talked to about working with NCTD and finding ways to make transportation easier, whether it was to employment sites or to demand generators or to schools or universities. So I think there's a lot of people out there that are very excited to work with the district, and some specific partnerships I think will show up in our final recommendations as well. Next slide, please. And yeah, to wrap up the current state assessment findings, so we have some opportunities here, and these are not necessarily going to be final recommendations, but wanted to share a couple of these with the board. So an example of something we might see is relaunching and expanding the targeted shuttle programs. So think about the Carlsbad connector that was actually showing some promising adoption before the pandemic. Things like that to kind of expand the reach that the district has, and also creating partnerships with potential employers in the region and anything else that could kind of drive more people to transit or see it as a viable commuting option. So that's exciting. And then exploring new marketing channels. So out of the human-centered design, community engagement work that we're going to be doing, we want to get a better idea of what's the best way to reach your riders. Is it through digital platforms, or is it through maybe other in-person ways? Just to make sure that you are, adequately getting the input that you need from them on what the service should be like and changes that need to be made. So we're exploring some new potential marketing channels for the district as well. Next slide, please. Yeah, so to wrap up, in subsequent board meetings, we'll be covering a couple of topics. We'll be talking about the results of our scenario planning and the implications for transit. So we'll share the narratives of these 4 possible worlds that we see in North San Diego County and what that could mean for NCTD. We'll also be talking about our resident survey engagement. So once we have the results from the Circulate survey, we'll be sharing those. And then in another meeting, also talking about our Futurescape tool, maybe doing a demo of that, and as well as covering our approach and any quantitative results we get from that from a ridership standpoint of what we're expecting these strategies to deliver. So we're really looking forward to continuing to have an open conversation, discussion with the board and share some of our findings. And that's all at this point. So happy to take any questions on our project.
Before we move to board questions, Anthony, do we have any public comments on this item?
We do not, ma'am.
Thank you. Let's see here, looking at the board. I think Board Member Contreras, your hand is raised.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to say that I'm really excited to see, different strategies at how we can become a more effective transit district. So I've really appreciated being part of the process, and I look forward to the future. And I just want to throw a reminder out there, it is difficult when we're looking at having enough bus operators. And, one of the things when we want to grow ridership, we're looking at, different real estate that we have here at North County Transit District. And, I just want to continue to advocate for workforce housing, affordable housing on the land that we have. And I feel like that should be, primary consideration. But in any case, I'm really excited to see this project move along. Thanks.
Thank you. Board Member Jenkins.
Yes, thank you. I have maybe a couple questions here. I'm wondering how we compare. You mentioned that you speak with other agencies. I think you said about 50 of them or so. And I'm wondering how we compare, say, to LA and San Francisco as far as ridership, because it's been stated that in the county, we probably have, let's be generous, maybe 5% of our population uses transit. How does that compare to other major cities in the state? Do you have any idea on that?
Yes, great question. So as part of looking at these leading practices from other agencies, we looked at pretty much at the data that was available, publicly available on what each of them has done, including ridership. Obviously, San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York, these are agencies that have different, these are bigger cities, and there's a larger service area, larger population, larger ridership numbers. So that being said, we're looking at strategies that these agencies are deploying, understanding that it might not necessarily be deployed the same way in North County, but we're just trying to see what else is being done in the US in different areas to try to attract people back to the service or convince people to take that one transit trip instead of getting in their car and driving. And those are things that are definitely applicable in Los Angeles and other cities as well. So we're not necessarily I guess everything we're seeing, we're trying to take back to North County and say, is this something we could do here? Is this not something that the district could do? So taking kind of what we see from other agencies with a grain of salt, but at the same time, collecting a large swath of possible strategies or initiatives that we could do.
Okay.
Councilmember Jenkins, just another note on that. So we've also done, separate from the Deloitte study, a peer analysis that looks at those specific questions in relation to agencies that have like service to us. So that analysis will be at the marketing and committee in June. So we'll have a more in-depth look at that peer analysis in June for the marketing committee.
Okay. And when you're looking at this, North County is not as dense as, say, San Diego would be. So you are looking at this specifically to North County and not including what's might be going on to the south of us. Is that correct?
Exactly correct. So this is actually probably good to talk a little bit more about our FutureScape tool. So this modeling simulation tool that we're using, we used NCTD's specific network and specific census level data from North County, specific census tracts as input data to our tool. So while some of the data that we're using is kind of published at the county level from Sandag, wherever we can make that specifically applicable to North County in those situations, we're doing that.
Okay. And then this might be premature for this question at this point, but you're, I think, several months or more into this. What do you see as our biggest challenge at this point in time?
Yeah, I think the operator shortage, frankly, has come up a lot. I think being able to provide or operator service and be confident that you'll have the operators to do that on a daily basis is vital to building the trust and providing a reliable service. So that's something that's a very real challenge right now. And it's not just NCTD. This is something that a lot of other transit agencies, most in fact, around the country are dealing with. So definitely going to be monitoring the situation in the industry to see how are some agencies handling this. What are some ways to fix that before we focus on maybe some other initiatives that we're talking about.
Okay. And then another question, I think you mentioned you have done some on the ground investigations. And so how can you give us an example of, I know you're working with Circulate San Diego, but how will you be reaching out to the residents specifically in North County as to what they think about transportation and what their needs are, and to get their feedback? Can you give us a couple examples of that?
Yes. So we haven't actually started the survey with Circulate yet. We're still preparing it.
Okay.
But as part of that, we're planning to have an online survey as well as several in-person events in different cities in North County to engage with people face-to-face and directly.
So probably part of what we need to figure out is, because we know ridership is down considerably, how do we get to those riders who previously rode transit to get their feedback? Because isn't that a critical component of the feedback that we need? How do we get to them?
Yeah, that's a great question. We're currently working with Circulate on ways that they can do that. So they've done transportation related surveys before. So to fully agree that it's important to get the current riders, maybe the people that used to ride transit but are not anymore, and then also even engage with the people who have never ridden transit or considered it, to maybe understand what might be a situation in which they would consider taking the train or the bus to a certain event. So, but yes, that second group of people that used to ride and have not since COVID, really important group that will work with Circulate more to make sure that we engage with.
Okay. That's all for now. Thanks.
Thank you.
Board Member Rodriguez.
Thank you. Couple quick questions. So, our region is significantly different than downtown San Diego or LA or Chicago, where I'm from, and things are a little bit more spread out. And the feedback I'm hearing on the ground with respect to mass transit is it's inconvenient, takes longer. And so, in order to meet the demand on the ground in North San Diego County with the district, what efforts are we taking to ensure that our services are convenient and ultimately competitive to owning your own vehicle? Because in the end, if we can't compete with owning your own personal vehicle to get to the grocery store or doctor's appointments or dropping your kids off at school, we're just going to have an uphill battle with respect to ridership. Ridership is low because it's not convenient, and the only individuals using mass transit are the ones who are economically challenged. And to expand our services to individuals that could make the decision to use mass transit, it's going to take a service that is convenient. And so, I want to understand the dynamic between, recruiting individuals who would traditionally use their personal vehicle, but instead choose mass transit like North County Transit District because it's more convenient, it's cheaper, it's easier. If you can please address that.
Yeah, sure. First of all, fully understood about kind of the suburban landform of North County versus downtown San Diego. That's likely not going to change, right? We understand that that's kind of the way the environment is. And then that also kind of begets a different set of transportation needs regionally. So really what we want to understand with the community engagement survey is what are the local or the hyper-local transportation needs? Perhaps why have people not considered transit? We've also heard convenience as a major and time as a major thing. So we've done some research on what is the time to take an NCTD trip versus driving. So some of those things as well. And we expect to get more data specifically during our community survey on that. And it's, I think when we're thinking about increasing ridership, I don't think we're expecting everyone or a lot of people in North County to necessarily give up their car for all trips and choose transit for every single trip. I think a big part of our approach and something we're looking into and that we might see in the recommendations is how do we win some of those trips where maybe they don't need to take a car, or maybe it's not a commuting trip, weekend leisure trips, maybe trips from an inland city to one of the coastal cities on the Sprinter. So thinking about some of those incremental trips where somebody might actually be able to might consider transit, and it might be a better experience than driving, in fact. And we believe those are out there. So a lot of it's going to be, depending on the different type of persona or their different needs, we might be able to win some extra trips there. And that's kind of what our approach has been, but fully understood the situation in the county or in North County where, things are maybe further apart and it's less dense than in San Diego proper.
No, absolutely. And I appreciate that. So I think my only other additional feedback would be, we need to make it more incentivized. We need to make it more valuable to use mass transit than a personal vehicle. I know a big goal, the target is to offset greenhouse gases, be more environmental friendly. And the only way we're going to hit that target is if we make it more convenient and less expensive. And so, looking at Uber and rideshare and those sort of services, in what way, shape, or form can we incorporate some of those dynamics versus, really expensive, heavy rail, bus systems? How can we, as a North County district, prepare for the future and incorporate those services of convenience to increase our ridership? I think that needs to be a big part of our objectives moving forward in the next decade.
Yeah, I just want to add that I appreciate you mentioning the word incentives, because I think there are some early stage pilots that we are starting to look at for how behavioral nudging and incentives presented at the right place at the right time is critical. A lot of that, frankly, depends on the fidelity of data you have to make such decisions and offer such incentives. So we will be looking at ways in which you could advance fidelity of data. I mean, to be honest with you, like working off a census is hard because it's not real and not real time. And it's, we in the technology world, especially private sector, a lot of nudging and incentives happens because they just have better data about all of us. So it's a sensitive topic, but something that is in early stages of exploration in terms of how do you improve the fidelity of data in ways that then allows you to present more timely incentives and helps you like nudge behaviors. So we would definitely be applying some of the thinking and studies that we've done along those lines in the way we shape recommendations here.
Awesome. I really liked it. I really appreciate that feedback. And I know speaking with a lot of constituents on the ground about encouraging them to use mass transit and the obstacles to do so have a lot to do with convenience, right. and however we can bridge that gap as a North County is going to be really worth its weight in gold on how we prepare for the future of transportation. And so I really appreciate you guys and anything we can do to create incentives is such an important part of the policy making we make in the future.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Board Member Rodriguez. Are you finished?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Chair. I have no further comments.
Thank you. Board Member Gasterland.
I want to echo Karina's comment that this is a really exciting thing that's happening here. And I want to thank your team again for spending more than an hour with me last week as we looked at the data analysis and how you're doing it. We talked about high performance computing, we talked about mesh, and we talked about models. And one of the things I want to mention here is one of the things I asked about my fellow board members was starting with the SANDAG 2030 snapshot. It's a computational model of what the region will look like in 2030, and then bringing it backwards to 2022. And this always goes to, forgive me for the bluntness, but garbage in, garbage out. So one of the things I've asked that Deloitte be very clear about with us is how have they checked that 2022 data once they generate it? What are the integrity checks and what are the ways of knowing that that input to the model is reliable such that the output from the model, the predictions of it will be reliable? Which brings me to my question for you guys. So last week, one of my colleagues at UCSD and sat with another of my colleagues at UCSD waiting for the 101 bus, and 3 buses in a row didn't come. Luckily they enjoyed having a chat with each other, but this was bus operator problems. This was 2 hours of waiting for a bus for people who the alternatives were to call an Uber, walk, 8 miles, or they had no alternatives. So, and these are colleagues who have chosen, as I do, to make the 101 bus behind me their favorite and to use it on a regular basis to get to work. So the question is apps to be able to be reliable. So Chris Orlando has pioneered now the Twitter app or the Twitter handle where people can go. But what we really need is something more along the lines of what MTS is doing, I believe. And that's you put in your stop number and the bus number. Actually, you don't even need to do the bus number. You just put in the stop number and it tells you where are the buses right now. And if you know your stop, you can do that when you're in your office and time walking out to the bus stop. So how are you going to study apps and use of information science networks, informational networks, to be able to give reliability that comes not necessarily from every bus coming, but from people being able to know exactly when the next bus is coming to the place that they want to go from as they launch to go to where they're going?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Gastelum. And it's great to see you again. I enjoyed our conversation last week. It's certainly a reliability issue. It's also a predictability issue, right? So maybe we're certainly looking at ways to make this service more predictable, or at least get real-time vehicle data out to riders. The Twitter handle that's specifically allocated for alerts, I think, is good. We're also exploring several apps that exist today, including the transit app, where several other agencies have integrated with that, and you're able to see those specific vehicles reflected in that app. And there's a couple different solutions like that. So I think like exploring ways to at least make vehicle location more available, even though it already is in some places, certainly something we want to do.
Board Member Gastelum, so we do have those tools and they are in place. I think part of the challenge is making sure that a couple things. One, that our riders are aware of it. So right now on our website, you can click a route and see when the next bus arrives. The challenge is not every rider is aware of that, and not every rider carries the phone with them to do that function. So these technologies are in place and we are deploying them. But if you think about the notion that we have a full spectrum of riders, some very technology enabled, can deploy those types of technologies, some not technology enabled. So we have those tools in place. I think we have a lot of work to do in terms of one, making sure our customers are aware that they're there for their use, and then two, making sure that the information is available in a variety of ways. So if you don't have a phone, you're getting information in other ways. So there's lots of things that we've looked at. Some are already in place and some we can do in the future. And then just I think it's important to note your example of, we talk about the operator shortage a lot, and it's something that we spend a lot of time talking about, but we do know that this has a very real impact. And the example you gave is a real life impact of what this means. And please know that we're aware of that, and we hear that, and we know that it's easy to say operator shortage, but at the end of the day, we know that is time in someone's day that has been lost because of that impact. So I appreciate you bringing that up and sharing that example with us.
I see Matt has unmuted, our executive director.
Oh, I was listening, but I think Chris articulated to me the bigger issue is everyone, all sectors, public and private, are facing the challenge of being able to successfully recruit people. The need for app is something I think that is justified under all circumstances. But the bottom line of it is we need to have reliable service. We need to address the staffing issue. I know we're in the midst with everyone else struggling to deal with it, but the big shame of it is this is a big opportunity that's been lost by the fact that we don't have product control in terms of moving the process along as fast and as aggressive as we want in terms of trying to get people hired. But the big focus for us is, yes, we need to have the tools, but more importantly, you should not have to think about needing the tools. The buses should show up, the trains should show up, the services should operate as scheduled. That's what our focus is. And we'll be talking a little bit more about that in the budget. And I can tell you, based upon my prior conversation with Chair Edson, we'll be talking about this in July and in September in terms of steps that I think that we are going to need to take as a district to be able to gain control, more accountability, and more responsiveness to the needs of our customers when we're facing these types of challenges. But the big underlying issue is we need to hire more people, and the people that we have need to come to work.
Yeah, good, thank you. My second question, I'll keep it short, is about safety, especially perceived safety for minors on the public transportation. We talked last week about a bus stop in front of every school, every elementary school or high school, and having ways for parents to feel confident that their kid will be okay on the bus. So in my household, we used it between Del Mar and St. James Academy up in Solana Beach. It's a bit of a hike from there, but we felt comfortable. But not everybody does. How do we address that? And will you be looking at ways to address that in your studies?
Yes. So that's one of our key, when we talked about uncertain forces impacting NCTD, certainly a key uncertain force there, right? What is the public perception of this as a safe transportation option? And while we don't necessarily know how that will play out in the future, with COVID safety for one thing, but other general security as a different thing, certainly looking for ways to make data on security and safety more available or better understood by the public, from not just a marketing standpoint, but from a communication standpoint, and also making sure that riders and non-riders are aware of the measures that NCTD is taking to ensure there's a safe environment at stations and on vehicles. So definitely looking more and exploring, creatively, what are some ways to make that better known throughout the public.
And just substantively, Board Member Gastelum, we are actually expanding our contract with the Sheriff's Department, adding some additional resources. I think over the last couple of board meetings, we've had a couple of items where we're standing up additional security enforcement stations. But to go directly to your point, as we're looking to launch our app, to procure an app and launch an app, we're really looking at those types of features being built in to some of the systems to help parents know that their kid actually got on to the vehicle and that they arrived at their destination. And and the whole notion of safety and the perception of safety is beyond just the kids, it's for everyone, that we want to make sure that everyone feels safe and secure when they're at a station or getting on a bus, even the confidence of knowing that I'm getting on the right bus from a safety and security point of view. So this is something that at the top of our mind, we're already making significant investments and taking significant actions right now to really make sure we're pushing this information out, and that we're showing the public proactively what we're doing to foster a safe and secure environment for them.
Great. Good. Thank you.
Board Member Hensy?
Thank you. Yeah, really great questions by my colleagues. One point I just wanted to highlight and make sure that we're capturing is this pilot we're doing for the Youth Opportunity Pass, and make sure that we're getting a lot of those youth voices captured. Hopefully we'll be able to continue some version on in the future, but we're going to have really high ridership in the next year with these young riders. And so understanding their needs and understanding their, maybe some of it's what Dr. Gasterlin touched on, how safe are they feeling? What issues have they encountered? And how can we overcome those issues in the future? So just wanted to put in a plug for that.
Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Rodriguez, before I take your next question, Board Member Hensy, are you finished?
I am, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Rodriguez, I'm going to ask a couple of questions first before I go back to you, since we've been around once. So I really appreciate the questions that my fellow board members have asked. I think they're great ones. And, I had to check several of mine off the list as we went through. I was particularly interested in, again, how you guys perceive the Youth Opportunity Pass program. To me, that's a major nudge, and, something that can net future riders. How do you guys feel about that? Are you familiar with it?
Yep. So we've spoken with Chris at length about that, and are also equally excited about it. That's something that over the course of the rest of this project, we'll certainly be monitoring from a ridership standpoint, and also engaging with some of those youth riders as part of the human-centered design. That's certainly a persona, right? Maybe a high school student or an early college student who might have access or transportation needs and might not have a car, and those are needs that we can meet with NCTD maybe. So certainly trying to get more information from them on the service, their perception of transit. Totally agreed. Just from a customer acquisition retention standpoint, like these are people that if we convince them the service is reliable and good and convenient, to an earlier point, like these could be lifelong transit riders. So certainly going to be monitoring the data that we get out of this pilot program and other pilot programs as well, right? Understanding the Uber Lyft pilot that's going on too, and how does that make, how does that improve access to transit stops in the region? So like a lot of the pilots that are ongoing, we're interested in and are kind of folding into our work here.
Okay. Dr. Gasterlin had mentioned the sensor-driven solution that aids predictability so that people can look at when their bus is coming in if they know their bus route number. I'm very familiar with that type of a solution. I think it's a great one. I'm interested to know that we have that capability, to learn that we have that capability, and just think that maybe we need to work on promoting the fact that we have these technologies. I mean, are we really getting out to the public all of the ways that we are able to help serve them? I'm not sure that's the case. So I think maybe we should look at how we're marketing these different tools that do actually allow things to be more convenient, our services to be more convenient. It's great if it's convenient, but if you don't know that it's convenient or you don't know how to access those tools, it's just sitting there wasted, right? You had mentioned in one of the early slides about infrastructure is aging along with funding models that are supposed to fund the repairs. So I'm very interested in learning about new funding models, and I don't expect you to take that time today, but will we be hearing about that in the future?
Yeah, I can take this one, Ben. Thank you. Yes, I think there are emerging funding models coming out. I think some of this is linked to innovative partnerships. Some of this is linked to how you design incentives and how you involve private sector around these incentives. So there's multiple methods that we are exploring, and we will bring those ideas to you all and see which one of these might be something that you want to pursue.
Okay, well, I think those are really my questions because everyone has been very participative. Board Member Rodriguez.
Yes, thank you. I'm just going to make additional brief comments. So the youth incentive pass, I think, is a huge opportunity as we look ahead to the future to encourage ridership and encourage, protecting our environment and offsetting GHGs. My two oldest sons in high school, they have begun using those youth ridership passes, and everything from going to the gym, going to the beach, going to the mall, meeting with their friends. But it really took me as a parent putting pressure on them. Hey, use this opportunity instead of me taking you places. And so I'm excited about this program, and I think as we look toward the next decade or two in the future, anything we can do or any events we can do working with our local North County school districts to incentivize or create excitement around this pilot program, it's really going to set us up for success in the future to encourage as many youth that become adults in the future to try to use our public transportation systems as a priority, not only as more convenient and incentivized, but to do our part to offset GHGs and, enhancing our environment.
Here. Thank you very much. Mr. Tucker.
Yes, I just wanted to comment, Board Chair Edson, when you raised a comment about the marketing and communications. So it was interesting, as we were going through earlier phases of the work, Deloitte had identified kind of a cluster of activities, a need for NCTD around marketing. I wrote it down: marketing, communications, and strategic planning. And the interesting thing about it was that Chris's whole division was being created at the same time. And we're still populating the positions. ranging from a ridership development position, which is a position that NCTD never had, really investing in the communications and government affairs, hiring a government affairs person, hiring a dedicated strategic affairs person, strategic planning position, and really ensuring that the service planning department is staffed to a level to really support the goal. So this is something that's already underway from a district point of view. I think we're nearing completion of the recruitment to really build out the team, but that was one of the key elements, is to really build out that team, put boots on the ground, get the communication out. One of the comments I'll make, we are going to need to do a better job of communicating and educating our board members so that they can help tell our story. Because, you know, one of the feedback that I received, I think maybe was part of this study and maybe a part of a couple other things, is that there are a lot of things that we're doing that people know nothing about. And like most things, if you're trying to sell something, you know, running a commercial once a year will get you very limited activity. You have to really be on, you know, focus in on all of the different outlets and have a certain cadence and repetition of information to kind of create a common understanding of what's really happening. So as we go through this process with Deloitte and a couple of other studies and activities, one of the key pieces is we really do need to leverage our elected team to really help push us forward in terms of the information, because there's quite a few just super duper exciting things that are happening that are being tested as part of the Deloitte, but we're going to need help in terms of getting it out to the public, along with the investments that we're going to make through Chris's team to help get it out. So I wanted just to share that piece.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Matt. I think there's a definite nexus between marketing, sales planning, and what Deloitte is doing, and that we have an opportunity to really take advantage of their expertise in helping us move forward. And I love Chris's new team, and I kind of miss my days on MISPDA when I had a little more input in that. You know, I'm sitting here and looking at the bus behind you and thinking, okay, we have all these great tools that we can offer people. They don't know about them. Why don't we tell them on the sides of our own buses, right? So just saying. Thank you very much. I don't see any other hands raised at this point. I don't know if Chris has any closing words to say, but I'm very grateful to Anant and Ben for that interesting presentation. And I look forward to continuing discussions on this topic over the coming months. Thank you. Chris, anything?
No, just for the board's knowledge, you know, we'll come back in subsequent meetings with more detail about the Deloitte study. That there is a lot more to it than we were able to share today for time. And obviously, from the robust board discussion, there's a lot of interest. So we'll be back in the subsequent meetings with more details for the board.
Great. Thank you so much. As this item was informational only, there is no vote required. Next on our agenda is approval of minutes from the April 21st regular board meeting and the May 5th special board meeting. Since not all board members may have been present for each meeting, we'll vote on the minutes one at a time. Anthony, do any members of the public wish to comment on the minutes?
No, ma'am.
Okay, at this time, we'll end public registration to speak on this item. Does the board have any questions or comments regarding the minutes?
No, Chair, but I'd like to make a motion for approval.
Okay, motion by Rodriguez, I believe. And I didn't see your hand raised, so I couldn't tell. Was that you, Chris?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and I fleetingly saw Councilmember Hensey's hand raised. Was that a second?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and second that.
Okay, motion by Rodriguez, second by Hensey. Anthony, please call the vote. And that was for April 21st, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
On the motion of Board Member Christopher Rodriguez, seconded by Board Member Kelly Hensey, to approve the minutes of the regular board meeting of April 21, 2022. Board Vice Chair Bapata, how do you vote?
Aye.
Board Member Gastelum?
Aye.
Board Member Hensey?
Yes.
Board Member Morosco?
Abstain?
Board Member Rodriguez,
Yes.
Board Member Desmond, Board Member Jenkins,
Yes.
Board Chair Edson,
Yes.
Board Member Contreras.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay, may I have a motion to approve the minutes for the special board meeting held May 5th?
Jenkins will move.
Contreras, second.
Motion by Jenkins, second by Contreras. Please, Anthony, please call the vote.
Yes, ma'am. On the motion of Board Member Sharon Jenkins, seconded by Board Member Corinne Contreras to approve the minutes of the special board meeting of May 5th, 2022. Board Vice Chair Bapatal, how do you vote?
Aye.
Board Member Gastelum,
Abstain.
Board Member Hensy,
Yes.
Board Member Marasco,
Abstain?
Board Member Rodriguez,
Yes.
Board Member Desmond, Board Member Jenkins,
Yes.
Board Chair Edson,
Yes.
Board Member Contreras.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Great. There are 19 items on the consent agenda today. Sorry, Anthony, have any members of the public requested that any consent items be pulled?
No, ma'am.
Okay, then at this time, we're ending the public registration to speak on this item. Are there any board members who wish to pull any consent items?
Yes, I'd like to pull number 19.
Okay, we will trail that item to the end of the agenda. In that case, may I have a motion to approve consent items 2 through 18 and item 20?
Jenkins will move.
Oh, I will second. This is Hensy.
Okay, well, I think I heard Bhat Patel as made the motion and Hensy second. Anthony, please call the vote.
Yes, ma'am. On the motion of Board Vice Chair Bapatal, seconded by Board Member Hensy to approve consent items 2 through 18 and item 20. Board Vice Chair Bapatal, how do you vote?
Aye.
Board Member Gastelum,
Aye.
Board Member Hensy,
Yes.
Board Member Marasco,
Aye.
Board Member Rodriguez,
Yes.
Board Member Desmond, Board Member Jenkins,
Yes.
Board Chair Edson,
Yes.
Board Member Contreras.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Great. Next, we have 3 other business items on the agenda. Item 21 is an update regarding the development of the FY 2023 operating budget and the FY 2023 to 2027 capital improvement program. The Performance Administration and Finance Committee, also known as PAS, has already received a presentation regarding the budget, and they've asked questions and provided feedback to staff. Yoon Park Lynch, our Chief Financial Officer, will now review item 21. Yoon?
Good afternoon, board members. I will be presenting an update on the fiscal year 2023 operating budget as well as the capital program for the next 5 years. The budget will be placed in the June agenda item for consideration adoption, but I'll be providing a more detailed overview of the assumptions and the related to revenues and expenses that surround the development of our next fiscal year budget. Next slide, please. Just to, before we get started with the details on the budget, I just wanted to provide some background of all the different activities that preceded the development of the budget. On March 1st, this calendar year, the executive committee received a presentation from the executive director related to the budget guidance and strategic areas of focus. On March 17, the board set a public hearing for June 16 for consideration of the budget. And the board received as well the same presentation that was presented to the executive committee on March 1st. On April 7th, the Marketing, Service Planning, and Business Development Committee received the fiscal year 2023 service implementation plan and the assumptions surrounding the forecast on service levels for the next fiscal year. On April 21st, the board received an update on the fiscal year 2023 service implementation plan assumptions. And finally, last week on May 12th, the Performance Administration and Finance Committee received an update on the operating budget and the significant assumptions. Next slide, please. Before we get started, I want to kind of provide some context of things that were considered as part of developing our next coming fiscal year budget. and how some of these items may have an impact as we advance through the fiscal year. It is important to note that NCTD relies on 46% on revenues that are derived from sales taxes. Those are TD and Transnet, in order to be able to support our operations. We also rely on federal funding from the Federal Transit Administration to support preventive maintenance and a capital program. It is important to note that all this federal funding can only be used for PM, which is preventive maintenance activities or capital activities. We cannot use this federal funding to cover fuel, operator wages, employee wages, or any other expenditure that's not related to a maintenance activity. I also wanted to point out that our focus since 2008 has been on eliminating structural deficits and ensuring that we achieve long-term financial stability. As a matter of board policy, we maintain a minimum of cash on hand to cover at least 6 months of operations. We are also on track to paying down our pension obligation. We are increasing our annual payments in order to be able to pay off our pension liability by 2035. And also we are focusing on eliminating our current debt, which currently is related to a Sprinter, and also by 2035, and avoiding incurring any long-term debt obligations. Next slide, please. On one key component of the operating budget will be related to the transition for rail operations and facilities maintenance. On April 22nd, 2021, the board approved the proposed in-housing of these functions to be in-house here at NCTD. The first phase is related to the transition of our train operations and for our staff that will support the equipment maintenance. That transition will occur in late 2022, making effective those personnel be part of NCTD employees on July 1st, which will be the beginning of a fiscal year. We are also advancing procurements in order to be able to support the in-housing activity, and that includes cleaning services, uniforms, and equipment materials and other needs. The second phase of the business model transition will occur in late 2023. At that time, we will be bringing in-house the maintenance of signal, maintenance of way, and facilities maintenance. Through that transition, we'll be adding 80 FTEs as direct employees. Those employees are currently contracted on the Bombardier contract, but they will be brought in-house. We will also need to procure specialty contracts for all these different functions. And it is important to note that in order to avoid any gap in these services, there will be some duplication. So as one contract ends, we need to ensure that there's a seamless transition. So you want to make sure there will be some overlapping as one contract expires and the new contract begins. Next slide, please. Other considerations that are key for the coming fiscal year is related to high inflation and labor shortages. This is a reality that we are facing today. And we anticipate that these pressures on pricing and labor shortages will continue through FY23. Within our operating budget, we have included additional costs associated with our bus operations in order to achieve, in order to be able to fill those bus operators positions, as well as being able to retain those bus operator positions. High energy costs, this is something that we are facing today if we compare to where we were last year. Everyone is very familiar. If you go through a gas station, you are seeing prices be around $6, sometimes $6.50 a gallon of fuel. So this pressure will more than likely continue through the next fiscal year. And I will later go into more detail on what we anticipate those increases will be. We also continue to recover ridership, but however, we will not be fully recovered in FY23. So that will have some impact on our passenger fares as well. Positive train control, the project, the full implementation of positive train control will be completed on December of this calendar year, 2022. The majority of those costs were supported by funding from the FRA, from the Federal Railroad Administration, from the capital project. That project is very close to reaching conclusion. So any costs that are now incurred to make that system operational and ongoing will be impacting our operating budget. And as I mentioned earlier, FY23 and FY24 will be true-up years for NCTD as we transition into the new business model. And as we see, as we procure these services, more than likely we will see increased cost. When NCTD procured for the contract for rail operations and facility maintenance, that was 7 years ago. 7 years ago, when inflation was around maybe 2-3%. Now that those contracts are ending, we are more than likely going to see higher costs from the bids that are going to come through through the contracting activity. Next slide, please. Now I want to go into some details. This is really important. We are required by FTA to have a balanced operating budget for the next 5 fiscal years. So we have to ensure that our operating needs are covered first, and any excess funds are then programmed for capital program. Because we first need to understand what are the different revenues that are coming to the district to see what is the availability of funding. I will go through some of the more significant revenue sources for NCTD. I will start with federal funds. NCTD receives federal funding under formula funds. Those are under sections 5307, 5337, and 5339 to a lesser extent. Those federal funds can only be used for preventive maintenance activities or for capital activities. In this year, the bipartisan infrastructure law increased our funding for across the board by about 30%. We anticipate to benefit from that infrastructure law. We anticipate to receive almost $12 million of additional revenues. Those revenues are going to be used to cover our maintenance activity. And we will also continue utilizing American Rescue Plan Act funds. Those were COVID relief funds that were issued back in 2021. That was actually the third round of COVID relief after the CARES Act and then CRISA and then ARPA. NCTD was only awarded CARES Act and ARPA funds. The CARES Act funds will be completely exhausted by the end of this fiscal year, and we'll have American Rescue Plans that we can continue utilizing for FY23 and subsequent years. For the next coming year budget, we anticipate using about $25 million of American Rescue Plan Act funds. From the state side, NCTD relies significantly on revenues from the state transit assistance and from the state of good repair program. Those revenues are derived from the statewide sales tax on gasoline, as well on diesel fuel and vehicle taxes and fees. Next, and last but not least, related to local funds. The most significant source of funding come directly from sales taxes. Those are the TDA, that's Transportation Development Act, as well as Transnet. The TDA is a statewide sales tax that is dedicated to support public transit. And Transnet is a regional tax that is localized here in San Diego County. We rely about 45% of our total operating budget on these two funding sources. One thing that I also wanted to add is that for the this coming fiscal year, given that we had increased our customer service beginning in October 2021, we have incorporated now Transnet 8.1% revenues into our budget. This revenue is funding subsidizing the increased customer service. And for this coming fiscal year, that budget is $7.3 million. Other revenues that are not related to grant activities are fare revenues. Our fare revenues, projections are based on our service plan. We estimate what those revenues are going to be based on the projected ridership by mode. I do want to point out that for this coming fiscal year, NCTD will receive a subsidy from CNDAC of approximately $1.2 million from the Youth Opportunity Pass. That's a program that allows youth ages 18 and under to ride free in our system. That program started this May 1st, is scheduled to end the end of June of next year. And for that 12 months in FY23, we should be receiving $1.2 million. That revenue is not reported as a federal revenues. That revenue is being reported under local grants revenue. And finally, other sources of revenue that NCTD receives are related to operations, use maintenance fees, and dispatching, as well as low carbon fuel standard revenues for use of the renewable natural gas for bus fleet, as well as other revenues for leases, permits, and advertising. The most significant one that's related to the agreements with BNSF and Amtrak and Metrolink, those revenues are estimated based on the current shared use agreements. Now I will move into more detail of what are the significant assumptions that are driving our expenses for this coming fiscal year. The big one is going to be related to the increase in staffing, related to the in-house phase transition for rail operations and facilities maintenance. That transition is occurring in two phases. One of them will just start at the end of this June 2022, and that's related to coaster sprinter operations and maintenance. We have also we have also increased our support staff this fiscal year for that increased staffing, mostly on HR, administration, and payroll. And then the in-house transition for maintenance of way, maintenance of signals, and facilities maintenance, that will occur in the later part of the end of the fiscal year. We have also incorporated in our budget the additional staffing that's needed to support the coastal expansion service, and that additional cost is being funded by Transnet 8.1%. We have also included in our budget merit salary increases that are ranging from 0 to 4% for eligible employees. This chart, we wanted to provide some more details on the transition of our staffing. If you see in this fiscal year budget, we have presented 146 FTE, it's about 145.5. By the end of fiscal year 2023, we will have 372.5 FTEs. That's over more than 200 new employees that are going to be part of the NCD organization. I wanted to provide some details so you can kind of see on how this transition is occurring. When we started FY22, we started 145.5. Then there are new hires that are going to occur on June 2022. It's really the end of 2022. Those are, for the most part, 59 FTEs for rail operations and 28 FTEs for equipment maintenance. We also added 14 FTEs to support the coastal expansion service. By the end of this fiscal year, by June 30th, we should have about 258 FTEs. Then we will move into the next phase in FY23. On the first half, we will be bringing in-house support staff that will be supporting the in-housing of the next phase of the business model transition. So most of the staff that will be coming in-house are, some of them are rail operations and maintenance as well, but you also see some increases on IT staff as well as engineering and other departments. On the second half of 2023, I'm referring to really June 2023, that's when we'll be bringing in-house the facilities, maintenance away, and rail signals maintenance staff. And that's how we will end on 2023 with about 373 FTEs. Other significant assumptions is that we will continue to be under a decreased scope under the rail contract with Bombardier. We are still going to have some activities to continue under that contract. That's going to be related to the parts for coastal by labor cars, as well as 2 months of train cleaning and maintenance of way and maintenance signals. Since those two last activities really don't transition until the end of FY23, those will continue to be provided under the rail contract. I do want to point out that our three major contracts for rail operations, for facilities maintenance, and bus operations, those are subject to contractual adjustments based on the consumer price index. That index cannot be more than 3%. CPI has been over 6%, but given, in a way, the good news is that CPI was 6%, but because there's a cap, our cost is really only going to increase by 3% under these contracts. Next slide. Within the MB agreement, like I mentioned earlier, there's not only the adjustment related to CPI of 3%, but we have also added increased budget amounts for wages for bus operators beyond the collective bargaining agreement, so we can ensure that we can deal with the bus shortages. So hiring new bus operators as well as retaining existing bus operators. For the fuel budget, this is a big deal. We are seeing that fuel prices are at significantly higher levels than where we were last year. Within the budget, we are, based on the current price trend, we are assuming that our cost of fuel would go up by 76%. We're also seeing some price pressures on the prices for natural gas. Geopolitical events are putting some pressure on these commodity as well. So for CNG, we anticipate that cost to be 28% higher than it was last year. Any fuel consumed from the coastal expansion service, those are covered by Transnet 8.1, so those are being funded separately by those Transnet dollars. We have also included within our budget potential increases in the liability insurance cost. Last year, those increases in premiums did not quite materialize. We were actually able to achieve a savings last year, but there's just no guarantee right now based on current market conditions whether or not we will be able to achieve those savings again. So we are anticipating those rates to be higher, and those are included in our operating budget. Other costs that has been added to the budget as well is related to the Springer Technical Support and Material Management Services Agreement. On December 16, our board authorized the execution of an agreement with Siemens. That scope included the provision of materials to support maintenance and their base costs, as well as materials for the overhaul program for a Springer fleet, dedicated on-site and remote staff to support vehicle maintenance administration, as well as a new Siemens Corman asset management system. That contract will have a baseline increase of our total operating costs of $1.6 million. I do want to note that the asset management, having a robust asset management system is required as part of a strategic asset management plan, as well as by the FTA. As I mentioned earlier, this coming fiscal year, as we are closing out our capital project in December 2022, we are now factoring in a full year of PTC costs. That's going to be $3.3 million. And as we transition as well on the new model, there are going to be some mobilization costs and true costs, as we are anticipating the higher bids will come in based on the pressures that we see today with rising prices, as well as more robust scopes of work. From a professional services standpoint, there were some studies that were funded in this FY22 that are ongoing through FY23. At NCTD, we rebaseline our budget every year. We have a zero budget, meaning that we go from the grounds up. So when funds lapse, they need to be rebudgeted for the next fiscal year. So there's some studies that either started or not completed, and those will be ongoing. So those have been included in our budget as well. There's other studies that are going to be taking place as future generating projects. Those are the Carlsbad Village and Poinciana Station redevelopment, the Springer Station's parking lots and railroad corridor redevelopment, the Escondido Lamp Stop study, as well as naming rights. We continue our investments for service improvements. One of those is the market analysis and business strategy, the presentation that you just saw earlier from Deloitte. So that will be ongoing in this FY23. And finally, we also have studies that are needed in order to support discretionary grants applications. And the two major ones will be related to the songs double track as well as for the sprinter double track. To recap the total revenues and total expenditures, I went briefly over the significant assumptions that are behind these amounts. For the FY23, we are proposing a total budget, a balanced budget, where total revenues and total expenses will be at $170.2 million. As you can see, the increase in salaries and wages is offset by purchase transportation, but we will see some increases on our materials and supplies, and those are related to fuel. In this, if you see on the prior slide, you will see that our total budget increase is about $25 million. Some of the price increases are going to be a natural extent of CPI and inflation. So there is a reality that a lot of most, if not all, of our costs are going to go up, just factoring CPI. But what we wanted to do on this chart is kind of outline what are those costs that really are not necessarily CPI driven, but are having an effect on the budget, meaning that those increases are more than 5%. First one is fuel. So there's two columns in here, baseline and one time. Baseline is an ongoing recurring cost, a cost that we anticipate more than likely there's a potential that that cost will continue in the next fiscal years. A one-time expense are those costs that are just single costs for that particular fiscal year, and those costs are for the most part related to assessment, studies, or any transition cost. So fuel is the number one. The second one is related to the bus operations and maintenance contract. Like I mentioned earlier, we did not only just increase by 3%, but we have also increased the budget under that contract to address labor shortages related to operators. Positive trend control is $1.7 million. 3.3 is the actual cost for the entire fiscal year. But since FY22 had 6 months of expenses, the net increase from one year to the other is really 6 months. So that's why you see the 1.8 instead of the 3.3. We also have the rail operations and maintenance staff increases. That cost is being funded directly by TASA 8.1. And then we have additional budgeted items for general legal services. And then I already explained a little bit earlier on the Sprinter technical supports and material management agreement. On one-time expenses, the majority of those are really related to studies. This table shows you which ones are some of the biggest ones. Those are the related to environmental management, Escondido landscape study, as well as threat and vulnerability study, etc. So this is a recap. So the $24 million in this table, we're explaining where the $20 million is coming from. And this chart illustrates the major sources of revenue for NCTD. As you can see, half of our revenue is close to half of our revenue, 46%, is coming from sales taxes, derived revenue, that's TDA and Transnet. And then about the next 30% is coming from federal funds, either through federal formula or through the American Rescue Plan Act funding. Next slide. And this pie illustrates what are our three major sources of expenditures. Those are purchase transportation, professional services, and our employees' salaries, wages, and benefits. Within NCTD's policy for developing our operating budget, we always ensure that we are conservative on how we estimate our revenues. And we also estimate our expenses on the worst case scenario. The reason that we do that is to make sure that we stress test a budget in a way, meaning that if there was, for example, an unexpected increase in fuel prices, more than the 76% that we forecasted, we want to make sure that there's some mitigation in order to cover those additional expenditures. So through this table, you can see that every year for the last 5 fiscal year, NCT has been under budget compared to the actual. So for just referring to FY21, we ended our under budget by $16.5 million. And for this fiscal year, we anticipate that we'll be $10 million under budget. So now I will be transitioning into the capital improvement program. The capital improvement program is a 5-year program. However, any year beyond this coming fiscal year can be changed and revised through subsequent annual budget processes. The initial CIP was approved by our board on December 16, 2021. That approval was done back in December in order to meet deadlines from CNDAC for programming the projects within the Regional Transportation Improvement Program as well as the State Transportation Improvement Plan. These deadlines need to be met to ensure that NCTD can access federal funding when those funds are being apportioned by the FTA. In June, we always come back to the board to reauthorize our capital program. And I do want to point out that there will be some changes to that program that was approved back in December. Next slide. This table shows a quick summary of the 5-year CIP that was approved by the board on December 16, 2021. The total CIP for FY23 was $53.4 million. Total 5-year of almost $123 million for the 5-year period. Next slide. We are proposing the following revisions to our capital program. As you can see, the revisions are for multiple reasons. Some of them is that we were able to fully fund some of these projects, given that we had some budget savings in fiscal 2022. We were able to reprogram some of those TDA dollars to pre-fund some of these projects. So you will see, for example, for the coastal locomotives, that project is now fully funded. Was mostly fully funded in FY22, and we are removing the funding in FY24. The other projects have been canceled, and other projects need additional funding for advancement. And some projects have been reprogrammed, meaning that it's a net change of 0. They just have been either advanced or delayed, so they have been moved among fiscal years. Overall, our proposed CIP revisions for the next 5 years is a net reduction on capital expenditures of $3.4 million. And this table summarizes what the new constraint CIP will be, and it will be put for consideration for adoption by our board on the June 16 meeting. We also wanted to provide a visibility on our 5-year forecast. Our 5-year forecast is intended to provide what are the projected revenues and allocation of fundings for the next 5 years. As I mentioned earlier, it is a requirement by the FTA that we have balanced budgets, which this table shows. However, I do want to point out that that surplus is more than likely going to be needed for capital. If you see under the funds allocation line item, you will see that you have high capital expenditures for the next 2 fiscal years, 23-24, and you see that those amounts are going down for next, for 25, 26, 27. It doesn't mean that our capital needs are lower, or doesn't mean that we don't have the capital needs. It just means that in order to incorporate those projects within a capital program, we have to have more project readiness and more visibility of what those estimated costs are going to be. So as times go by, more projects are added to a CIP. So I just wanted to point out that that surplus is not really a surplus. Those are funds that are going to be programmed for the capital program.
Okay. So we're going to make a little transition to me. I know at the last Performance Administration and Finance Committee, we had some discussion around recession. You know, one of the things that we all have to keep in mind, the more we talk about a recession and the more we start acting like there's going to be a recession, there's more likely to be a recession. But I wanted to make sure, based upon the excellent discussion that we had, that we provided the board with a certain level of visibility about what has happened historically when there has been a recession. Earlier in Yu's presentation, she identified that approximately 46% of our revenue is derived from sales tax sources. If most of you all remember that the Great Recession occurred essentially from December 2007 to June 2009. Now, when we say that, that's just the economic definition of a recession. I thought it would be helpful for the board members to be able to see this graph in terms of the Transnet revenues that have been generated between 2001 and 2020. What I would note for you is that if you look at the 2005, you will see that that was the peak year for Transnet revenue at about $324 million. And then I will point out for you that in 2009, during the depths of the recession, the revenue was $253 million. And if you look at where we sit today in terms of 2020, it was $317 million. So I wanted to give you all a little bit of context about what happened during the Great Recession. Can we go to the next slide, please, Anthony? So this slide brings it home as it relates to NCTD within the context of when I was hired back in December 2008. And you can see that this was the 2009 budget outlook at that time. And you can see those significant and projected deficits. And it's important to note that NCTD at that time actually had a structural deficit. But I also want to give you guys context in terms of when there's a recession happening, there's typically a whole lot of other stuff going on that is unrelated necessarily or related to a recession. So in the case of the 2009 budget outlook, we have what happened. Well, local sales tax revenue was down by 20%. The state needed to balance its budget, so they were rating transit funds. And then the district was bringing the Sprinter online. And so to give you the context of what we have been working on since I've been here has been to address the structural budget deficits and to reposition the district. So I want you to keep that in mind in context of what we talked about earlier this year about us focusing now on accelerating our pension payments, I think by 15 years. Is that correct, you?
That's correct.
And saving $15 million to essentially extinguish that obligation, not assuming any more long-term debt and just retiring that Sprinter debt that we have that's due to be retired in 2031?
2035.
2035. And so I wanted to give you that context of when there's a recession happening, there's typically a whole heck of a lot going on. If you can look at the periods of time that the financial impacts occur, there is no bullet out there that allows you to escape, whether you're a public or private sector entity, a recession. You may be able to weather it and some better, some worse than others. The key piece is we would not be entering into a budget with a recession with a structural deficit. Can we go to the next slide? So I know for a lot of you, you're fairly new and you've missed the fun that we were having. And I say that very facetiously. When transit agencies have to navigate recessions, you either raise fares, and that's a policy decision the board members, elected officials have to make. I can tell you raising fares is a preferred alternative to reducing service. Reduce expenses, keeping in mind that transit operations is the largest area of expense for any transit agency. Operator wages and mechanic wages, that's where the vast majority of the costs are. For a rail agency, particularly a rail agency that owns the railroad right away, there is very limited cost reduction opportunities because you have to maintain the railroad to the exact same level of standard that is required by the Federal Railroad Administration and from a safety perspective. You can identify new revenues as a way of navigating a recession. Now, typically, it's not the best time to be going to voters to be asking them for additional revenues. In the middle of a recession, everybody feels threatened, everybody feels pinched. So typically that does not happen. So that's why you try to look at these strategies well in advance of a recession, like our real estate projects, like our name and rights, as ways to increase revenue coming into the district that are not dependent upon sales tax or customer ridership. So that's why you have to start thinking about those approaches. So the Carlsbad Village development, I won't throw out a range of numbers, but there's a significant range of potential numbers based upon different scenario outcomes from development that could generate a significant additional and new revenues for the district. But again, it's likely to take 5 years unless the city of Carlsbad really moves the projects through the approval process really fast before a shovel goes in the ground on that project. We're anticipating with the Oceanside Transit Center project that within hopefully the next 3 years that a shovel will go in the ground on that project, and sometime shortly thereafter we'll begin receiving some of that revenue. Obviously, when we navigate a recession, typically it's a combination of raising fares and reducing expenses is the method to absorb some of the impacts of a recession. Can we go to the next slide? So how well prepared for NCTD is for a recession? We're in the middle of a major transition of operations. I would just state from my humble perspective, you know, the thought process, the fear, the concern about there potentially being a recession should not deviate the course from a long-term strategy. If you got a good long-term strategy, if you got a good investment plan, you shouldn't panic. I know people from time to time when they start seeing the stock market go down, make very panicky decisions, like jumping out of all of their investments and trying to move it. And then they lock in that loss because they made that decision to panic at the moment. If you're confident in your long-term strategy, you continue and always adapt to what's happening to you along that journey. As you're well aware, the board has adopted specific policies that drive us to be conservative, and we constantly seek ways to manage expenses. You and I, we spend quite a bit of time together working through the budget process. I know ramps on and off to lower expenses within committed contracts. So I already know methods that we could employ should we see a slowdown in the economy, and we would be absolutely proactive in terms of planning. But again, I don't want you to walk away to say, hey, Matt says if we have a recession, we're going to be immune to it. That's just not the case. Our ability to navigate a recession is dependent upon the depth and the length of a recession. For the district going through a Great Recession, it was really, really hard. And I think the message that we got loud and clear from a public perspective, hey, you guys need to solve your problem. And we worked really hard over the last 10 years to really work through, and we're coming out on the other side. We're now starting to make significant investments in our transit system that will really make the system better meet the future needs of North County. Next slide. So I guess this is back to you, but I'll just cover it so that we can just start taking questions. This is kind of the next steps of releasing the full budget documents to the public and the board considering and adopting a budget at the June meeting. I will just note, I think the chair mentioned it, typically at the June board meeting, we do a reduced budget presentation because we know for some of the board members, they have heard this budget presentation and engaged in these discussions quite a few times leading up and building up to the budget process. So with that, Chair, we're ready to turn it back over to you for questions. You're on mute, Chair.
I was muted. Yoon and Matt, thank you for the detailed presentation. As a reminder to the board and the public, this will be the last time that we review the budget prior to the budget being adopted at our June meeting. So please keep in mind that today is really the best opportunity to provide key input and direction to staff on both the budget and CIP. The presentation we receive that we receive in June is typically more of a high level presentation based on prior input. And some of that is that input that we will be providing today. So Anthony, before we move to board questions, do we have any public comments for this agenda item?
We do not, ma'am.
Thank you. At this time, we're ending public registration to speak on this item. I see a few hands raised. Director Rodriguez.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for those comments, Mr. Tucker. Just a reminder from the perspective of future revenues and working with local jurisdictions. I know you mentioned working with Carlsbad, but I just want to reiterate the opportunities in Oceanside on several parcels that the North County Transit District is moving forward on with an RFP. I've had detailed discussions with our new city manager, interim city manager, I should say, and understanding the goals of the city. We really want to work with the North County Transit District as a part of our updated general plan to facilitate the highest and best use of those parcels for the mutual benefit of both the North County Transit District and the city of Oceanside. And so any prioritized discussions surrounding those parcels is greatly appreciated as we move forward to look at the highest and best use.
So I just wanted to commend City of Oceanside. We work really, really closely with the City of Oceanside staff on the Oceanside Transit Center project, and we will work very closely with them on the development of what we're referring to as the Sprinter bundle of projects. The city is really exudes kind of some of the best practices in terms of collaborating with the district in the early planning and the selection of developers. So trust me, Board Member Rodriguez, we really are excited about working to advance those projects within your city. And I would really like for you to pass on to your city staff our appreciation for the collaboration that they have with the district on advancing these types of projects.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And I know you guys have your timelines on releasing those RFPs. I would only like to reiterate the encouragement for North County Transit District to, if applicable, prioritize the city of Oceanside in working with us on the Oceanside specific projects, because we're, again, in our general plan update, and we would really like the opportunity to work with you guys on folding in any of those incentives or zoning objectives to be aligned with the private sector and North County Transit District. So whatever we can do to make that happen. I know you guys wanted to kind of move on that in a bundle with all jurisdictions, but if you guys can, incentive, if it's an incentive to the North County Transit District to move forward in a more expedient fashion on the Oceanside parcels, we would greatly welcome that.
Okay, we will work on that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Director Jenkins.
Thank you. Just want to make sure I'm not muted. I have several questions. On page 8, where you talked about proposed merit salary increases, is that in addition to COLA for employees? Do they automatically get some other increase?
No, ma'am.
Okay, there's no automatic
No,
increase
ma'am.
at all.
No, with the
Okay.
exception of with some of the collective bargaining agreements that are being negotiated, there will be COLAs in there, but then it won't be merit eligibility on top of that.
Okay, so it's one or the other.
One or the other, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. On page 9, where you had the budget FTEs for the changes coming up, I know we talked a little bit about this at PAP, but do we feel like we're going to be able to fill? I mean, we're talking about all these new hires. I know some of them are just transitioning over, but some of them will be new people. We're already having trouble getting employees. What are we going to do to make sure we can hit all of these numbers?
So I'll tackle this. So I will tell you, we have been very positively surprised in terms of the rail positions that we have been finding and attracting good candidates for those positions. So as we move into the transition, we are looking pretty good in terms of the positions that we needed to hire. In some of these other positions, particularly like in Yoon's area and others, that's going to be work. Trying to find sufficient applicant pool. We're just like everybody else. We're fighting every step of the way to be able to attract candidates. As we said today, Board Member Jenkins, we're not worried about the phase one of the transition that's going to occur in the last week of June. So we think we're going to be standing tall, looking good. But I would tell you, like everyone that I talk to, public or private, there is a strain in terms of some of the vacancies that exist or some of the needs that we have to hire people that we really do need to exhaust all efforts to try to successfully complete recruitments and hire top-notch candidates to come into positions that are advertised and available for hiring.
Okay. Page 14, where we talk about the positive train control. Stop me if you did comment on this, sorry. I believe North County Transit had received funding to help with the PTC was mandated to be done. So we received some funding for that, but we do not receive funding. Is that correct? For the ongoing operating costs?
Right. So we received, I think, about $87.3 million for the implementation of positive train control. I may be off by a few digits here and there. Very, very little local money from the district was required for positive train control. There's no specific earmarked money associated with the ongoing operations and maintenance of positive train control, but it's on my work plan, and we're actively already working, Board Member Jenkins, on how we can reduce positive train control costs going forward in the future. I don't want to talk too much about the different alternatives, but we are already looking at alternatives to hopefully reduce the cost while simultaneously improving the operations of positive train control.
Okay. Page 20, the $10 million surplus that we might have. Lot of discussion about recession and all that. That's not money we can necessarily bank and save for future use, correct? Or can
Right.
we?
Well, it's not a clean surplus of you can do whatever the heck you want to do, what you want to do with it. Some of those dollars can be rolled forward. So, for example, if we budget an assumption, I'll use preventative maintenance activities using federal funding. If we don't use all of that money in fiscal year, whatever, 22, 23, 24, we're able to carry it forward to the following fiscal year. So some of them carry over, but not all of those dollars are clean dollars that the district can do whatever we want. Our surpluses, because Yoon has trained me really well, are generated from the right-of-way. And the right-of-way is associated with shared use agreement payments made by BNSF and Amtrak and others to the district.
Okay. And then my last question or comment is on page 27, where you talked about the possible combination of raising fares and reducing expenses. Given that it may be a time of recessionary measures, does it make sense to, riders are going to have revenue income issues also. Does it make sense to possibly raise their fares when we're trying to increase ridership? Or what's been the historical perspective of, do we lose riders when we raise fares?
So for clarity, I'm not proposing and suggesting or recommending or saying that
Yes.
we're going to do any of this.
Right.
I'm giving you this. These are the things that happen for transit agencies when a recession occurs, or anytime our revenues don't match our expenses. So this is not a recommendation. This is not saying what we're going to do. But what you just laid out is just part of the whole consideration. Now, at the end, we have to have a balanced budget.
Right.
And so the whole thought process is that you're going to have to look at all of the different things that it will take for you to bring your budget into balance. Now, the historical action I can tell you is when I came in, we have really, really, really good labor partners. And I sat down at the table with them and they agreed not to take a contractual vested salary increase in a particular year as a way to help us offset expenses. All of those things are going to be at the table. But again, I'm just wanting to, I believe in preparing the board with information well in advance of anything coming up. This is just for illustrative purposes. Depending on what news channel you look to and what newspaper you read or what economists you follow, you can hear a range of different discussions relative to what's going on from an economic point of view. So again, this is just educational. This is not proposal or suggesting what we would be doing from a district point of view.
Right. Okay, thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Director Gasterland.
Yes, thank you. My main question is, what are the cost increases, the true cost increases beyond current costs for bringing the coaster and sprinter operations in-house?
So the phase one of the coaster is associated with the maintenance of equipment and with the train operations crews. What we presented to the board, I believe that cost is that cost neutral, Yoon?
That is correct.
Phase two of it involves right of way and other activities. Those costs were going to go up no matter what, to be perfectly candid. And the truth of the matter is, I can state confidently as the executive director that if we were to go back out to bid, and I mean for phase one or phase two, the cost would be significant. Each time that transit agencies bid these contracts out, they typically increase by double digits. And from a practical point of view, it was the last time we awarded a contract, we happened to get the highest rank and the lowest bid proposer, but that contract still increased by double digits. And so at the end, for us, we're going to be working through a really good understanding on phase two activities, Board Member Gasolin, in terms of understanding what does it actually cost for us to meet the standards that we want. And this is going to go across not just rail, but across bus. So a lot of times when we contract it out, you would bundle, for example, services like tree trimming and right-of-way maintenance. And within those contractors make decisions oftentimes to downscale the scope. So you're constantly an attention point about the work expectation being met. So right now we're going out with procurements to actually ensure all of the work, all of the things that we want to get done actually get done. Now, if we were to get to a period of time where fiscally we're strained, we would make some decisions about what things can we back off and do less of. But I'm really, really confident. And in fact, my confidence is enhanced that as we move forward, it's impossible to know. But the fact of the matter is, given what's happening within the economy, looking at what people are paying in wages and costs associated with management of the right of way, that we're in a really, really good position in terms of the decision to insource rail operations.
Okay, so for example, for the coaster, because you gave us specific, well, for operations actually. So that would be both Coaster and Sprinter, I presume. You know, you'll have 59 new hires, but will those really be new hires, or will all 59 people represent people who are being paid now by Bombardier?
Oh, good question. So it's a combination. So it's the people already being paid by Bombardier right now. And then, and I think we've already accounted for the additional people that are associated with the expansion. So
yeah, that's another 10.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So last question on this line then is there cost savings overall in the long run for bringing it in-house? And how do you know without doing an RFP for Bombardier or anyone else to compete for that?
Well, we've done again, I think this is the first, well, we're bringing it in. This is the first time the district has ever operated it, bring it in. We've made a pretty extensive presentation, Dr. Gasolin, to the board, and we'll provide you that information with the analysis that we included. The analysis that we did was actually excessively conservative from the district's in terms of our costs. And it really didn't build in what would likely be the cost if we had gone back out for procurement. So again, the reason that I can speak fairly confident is because we did that analysis in a way that was more punitive to the business model of bringing it in-house versus continuing to outsource it.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I have a couple of questions. See no other hands on the board. I'm going to ask them. So Yoon, on page 5, you mentioned the ARPA funds will continue to carry over into FY 2023, and it says budgeted 24.5 million. So is that 24.5 million the full balance of ARPA funds that we are sitting on, or are there other funds available? Because you'd mentioned and subsequent years, are there other funds beyond the 24.5 million that we have?
So we are actually awarded $60 million. We are going to probably use some of that in FY22, some of that in FY23, and we are going to roll over some of those funds for FY24 as well.
Okay, and approximately what would that balance of ARPA funds be if you go ahead and do the 24.5 in 2023?
Can we go to the slide on the 5-year assumption? If I didn't include it, I can provide you that information. It's included in the 5-year. Before that one, prior to that, with the 5-year forecast.
You didn't break it out to that detail, you.
Yeah, so it's included. I'll provide. I think we might having like 14 million to FY24, but I can be more specific. I'll look into that.
So that's fine. Offline is fine.
Yeah, but within our budget, we anticipate to have those funds available through FY24.
Okay, that's great news. It's always good to have some money that is kind of rainy day a little bit if we're looking at this recession that sounds like it's looming. There's been, and this is maybe a Matt question, there's been conversation and information about the state saying fare free public transportation for several months. Is that, in your opinion, going to happen? And if so, are we going to be paid for that?
Yeah. From all of the information that I see, if it does happen, we will be reimbursed for that.
Okay. I think that's all my questions right now. My colleagues asked, and both Yoon and Matt answered many questions. So this, again, like the last item, this is a purely informational item. So thank you very much again, Yoon and Matt, for the presentation. Laura Cote, Chief Administration.
So, Board Chair Edson, before you move to the next item, sorry.
No worries.
I wanted just to give a couple of pieces of information because people provided me additional information. So Rail has filled 121 of the 124 positions as we sit today. and Tracy has confirmed that we are advancing the Oceanside sites first in terms of development opportunities.
Thank you for getting those answers to us in such a timely manner. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Before we actually move to item 22, it's 4:10. That means we've been on now for a little over 2 hours. I suggest we take a 5-minute bio break, and I will see everyone back here at 4:15. Thanks.
Hey, Joel.
Hi, Terry. Okay, it's now 4:15. Laura Cote, Chief Administrative Officer, will now review item 22, a request for approval of ministerial changes to ensure that the district is in compliance with applicable requirements to include updates of plan documents as is required. Laura, are you with us?
I am. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Chair and members of the board. This item is asking for your approval to make some administrative updates to several documents that were included in your package related to the agency's deferred compensation plans. Next slide, please. So every 2 to 3 years, outside legal counsel is engaged to review our plan documents. And based on this recent assessment, several amendments are being proposed at this time. In prior years, these updates have been placed on your consent agenda. However, one of the documents requiring an amendment is the Executive Director's Employment Agreement. So we felt it appropriate and prudent to provide this item as a presentation to offer the board an opportunity to ask any clarifying questions that you might have. The first modification relates to changes in our trustees who sign on behalf of the plan. There have been some staffing changes over the last few years. So the last update you will see related to that is a resolution on the trustees. Regarding the administrative updates, there are 4 being proposed today. First is related to a change in the regulation that now requires distributions from the plan when someone reaches the age of 72. The previous age was 70 and a half. The second update is to clearly define the types of compensation that can be considered for deferral. Specifically, the plan now describes, for example, that paid administrative leave is not eligible to be deferred into the plan. The third change is related to what is called a true-up. The current plan allows for a 4% match by the employer up to an 8% salary cap that is paid per pay period. However, the language is not as clear regarding whether the 4% match can also be reviewed annually to ensure that any employee who does contribute the maximum annual amount would then receive the full employer match. By way of example, if someone defers the 8% with each pay period, as the current language indicates, there should not be any issue with this the so-called true up of receiving the full employer match. Sometimes, though, employees stop and start their deferrals throughout the year, or they change them up and down based on their financial circumstances. But in the end, they do indeed contribute the full percent in order to get the full employer match. This is the more common application of the rule to allow this annual true up for deferred compensation plans, and we will be more in line with best practice. The other item related to this is our outside counsel will need to work with us to develop our plan in alignment with the IRS. And so there will be a clarification to the IRS so that these are amended appropriately. The fourth and final change is regarding the Executive Director's Employment Agreement, related to the section that applies to Mr. Tucker's deferred compensation benefit that is provided by the board each year. The current language in the agreement is in need of updating so that it properly aligns with IRS regulations in describing exactly how the additional deferred compensation that the board provides each year is currently administered by the district. The great news is that the existing practice already does align with regulations. It's just the language in the amendment that needed to be modified to reflect operational practice. Also, in compliance with regulations, the new language also now provides for a date by which this amount would be transferred to Mr. Tucker's deferred compensation program, either in the form of retirement plan contributions, taxable compensation, or a combination of the two. This new date is now March 15th of each year. The changes related to this agreement do not increase or decrease the compensation provided to our executive director under this agreement. Next slide, please. So the recommendation before you today is to adopt Resolution 2209, approving plan amendments and restatement of the North County Transit District's Section 457 Deferred Compensation Plan and the 401A Retirement Plan and appointment of successor trustee, and approve an associated amendment to Matthew O. Tucker's employment agreement related to the deferred compensation program. So this does conclude my presentation. I also want to note that we do have outside counsel here in the event there are some technical questions that the board might have. And we would be happy to answer any questions at this time. Thank you.
Anthony, are there any public comments for this agenda item?
No, ma'am.
Okay, at this time, we're ending public registration to speak on this item. I do not see any hands raised from my colleagues. So I would entertain a motion to approve agenda item 22.
Delmar, so moved.
Moved by Gasterland. Second by,
Jenkins will second.
okay, second by Jenkins. Anthony, please call the vote.
On the motion of Board Member Terry Gasalan, seconded by Board Member Sharon Jenkins to adopt resolution number 22-09, approving amendment and restatement of section 457 deferred compensation plan and the 401A retirement plan appointment of successor trustee and approving amendment to employment agreement with executive director. Board Vice Chair Bapatal, how do you vote?
Aye.
Board Member Gasalan,
Aye.
Board Member Hensy,
Yes.
Board Member Marasco,
Aye.
Board Member Rodriguez, Board Member Desmond, Board Member Jenkins,
Yes.
Board Chair Edson,
Yes.
Board Member Contreras.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you, Anthony. On to item 23, Laura Cote. You're on again. Laura will review item 23. Thanks.
Thank you again. So this item is asking you to consider the option of holding virtual meetings, including hybrid meetings, through June 16th per Assembly Bill 361, or to resume in-person meetings beginning tomorrow. Next slide, please. So as mentioned at prior board meetings, we've discussed Governor Newsom signed AB 361 into law in September of last year. And this modified a number of the provisions of the Government Code or Brown Act related to teleconference public meetings. The bill is in effect until January 1st of 2024 and allows local agencies to hold meetings virtually so long as state or local officials have declared a state of emergency or those same officials continue to impose or recommend measures to promote social distancing. So the governor has removed many provisions of the state of emergency thus far, however, has yet to terminate it altogether. And on February 28th, the governor issued Executive Order N522, which extended the state of emergency at that time through May 5th, and then it was extended on April 26th through the end of December 31st. That was really related more to OSHA and their ability to pull together the regulations that employers needed to follow. Next slide, please. One of the things I like to offer is the latest statistics about our local COVID situation. As you can see on this slide, the latest statistics related to our region include an average of 798 cases per day, which were reported, and this is a 62% increase from the average 2 weeks ago. Of course, the good news is that number of hospitalized COVID patients has remained about the same. It has not increased, and the more serious cases and deaths are continuing to remain low. Next slide, please. So we're asking you to consider adopting one or two of these recommendations. The first one is either to adopt resolution number 22-10, proclaiming a local emergency, re-ratifying the proclamation of a state of emergency, and reauthorizing remote teleconference meetings, including hybrid meetings of the legislative bodies of the North County Transit District in compliance with Assembly Bill 361. This would be in effect May 20th, 2022 through June 16th, 2022, or to resume in-person meetings effective tomorrow, May 20th, 2022. That does conclude my presentation at this time. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Laura. Seeing no hands raised, I'm going to go ahead and considering the news regarding the widespread increase and the 62% increase in the last 2 weeks, I'm going to go ahead and, also based on the actions taken by other regional boards such as Sandag and Losan, I'm going to move to adopt resolution 2020, I will start again. To adopt resolution number 22-10, proclaiming a local emergency, re-ratifying the proclamation of a state of emergency, and reauthorizing remote teleconference meetings of the legislative bodies of the North County Transit District in compliance with Assembly Bill 361, effective May 20th, 2022 through June 16th, 2022.
So I'll second that, Chair Edson. This is Gasterland.
Okay, motion by Edson, second by Gasterland.
And I did have a question for Laura Cote.
Please.
Yeah, Laura, I'm curious where the hospitalization data comes from. I'm really familiar with two hospital systems in our area, Scripps being one of them, where, for example, 2 weeks ago it was 2 in-house patients with COVID and now it's 32. So that is quite an increase. So that's one part of the question. And then also, it might be good to just include the death rates as well. They stopped going down and now they're not changing, which means they're going to go up next. Death rates always lag behind the hospitalization rates, which lag behind the increased case rates. So I'm just wondering where the hospitalization data came from.
I can definitely send the link where I got that from. We do get that from the county site, and it depends on the date. This one was taken as of Monday, and there could have been an update on Wednesday, potentially as well, but we will definitely track that.
Thank you. I also see Director Jenkins' hands raised.
Yes, thank you. So, I had suggested the hybrid method at the last meeting, and come to find out that sometimes is or would be more difficult for staff should some and not all go to the meeting. That's a bad word. Those are not the right words to use. Want to participate in person. So Matt, could you explain why it really needs to be one or the other?
I think perhaps Laura would be the person.
Laura.
Oh, yeah, so I'll answer for because I had the conversation with board member Jenkins. So I'm not advocating either direction because that's not my role. But my feedback was just around the whole notion of kind of some of the coordination. I think needing secondary technology devices so that you can be able to see what the board members are doing, both present and folks that are remote. The timing and syncing of communications from a volume point of view. We have a centralized volume. You may need to use your computer volume, and then the timing of people clicking on and clicking off. All of this becomes a little bit of theater. Even we as staff, when we were originally up until the last few months, we were all convening in the same room so that we could make eye contact with each other. But it became a little bit cumbersome. And I can say, honestly, once we went back to our offices, our communication flow and our ability to see what's going on with the board, that whole experience was better. That's what my feedback is that from a practical point of view, in terms of ease for staff and ease of communication. But again, your job is not to make life easy for staff. I'm just sharing my feedback.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Director Gasterland?
I thought I'd add a remark. At UCSD, we've been hybrid for all classes since the fall. And there's some best practices that have been worked out. For example, with Zoom, if you have your laptop in front of you and you're present in the room, keep the microphone off and keep the sound off. But that's a way for a person who's in the room to have a gallery screen up and see everybody who's not in the room. That works well. So there might possibly be some best practices that could be implemented that would enable hybrid. We're actually going to be looking into that at the city of Del Mar. I hope. I've talked with the city manager about it. And we did that in our most recent council meeting during discussion. So I hope that we'll be able to come up with a way to do hybrid without a whole lot of investment in the new technology. Basically, it revolves around laptops. Everybody's got to have a laptop or an iPad.
Thank you for those comments. Seeing no further hands raised, Anthony, did I ask you whether there had been any public comments on this agenda item?
You did not, ma'am. I was going to remind you. We do not have any public comments.
Okay, at this time, we're ending public registration to speak on this item. Motion by Edson, second by Gasserlin. Please call the vote.
Yes, ma'am. On the motion of Board Chair Joel Edson, seconded by Board Member Terry Gassaland, to adopt Resolution 22 Text 10 reauthorizing remote teleconference meetings effective May 20th, 2022 through June 16th, 2022. Board Vice Chair Bapatal, how do you vote?
Aye.
Board Member Gassaland,
Aye.
Board Member Hinsey,
Yes.
Board Member Marasco,
Aye.
Board Member Rodriguez, Board Member Desmond, Board Member Jenkins,
Yes.
Board Chair Edson,
Yes.
Board Member Contreras.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you very much, Anthony. Agenda item number 19 was pulled from the consent calendar by Director Gasterlin. As this was a consent item, presentation has not been prepared that I'm aware of. Director Gasterlin, what questions do you have for staff?
Yeah. I'd like to inquire about the licensing. How much redesign was involved for the change of design for the Oceanside right-of-way fencing? That's my first question. I have three. Thank you.
How much redesign?
Well, so it's a change in cost, and the change in cost description indicates changes in how the fencing will be laid out in the design of it. And my question is, who's in charge of that layout and how did they go about doing it?
So this was a field work directive, and so while they were out in the field, there were some issues identified between the contractor and the project manager, primarily relating to access for our maintenance of way and signal employees to access the right-of-way. And so as a result, they included an additional 331 linear feet of the fencing, two vehicle access gates, one 4-foot personnel gate, one 3-foot 4-inch personnel gate, and they had to relocate some 140 feet of the fencing, and then they cleared some additional vegetation.
So for that amount of changes, the extra linear feet, relocating some and adding gates, does that trigger a need for an engineering license, in particular a Class A license, on the part of the contractor?
I believe that they already have the Class A license, and Scott and Julie are on as well.
Yes, they already have the license.
Okay, great. When did they get the Class A license? Because when I checked, which was in March, I guess they did not have it.
I'll have to research for that for you, and I can certainly get you an answer.
Okay, and then the second question, well, so that's my first and my second. My third question is, do they have a Class C license for fencing?
Their subcontractor, I believe, Scott, you're on the line, but I'm fairly certain the subcontractor has the C license for that.
That's correct.
Okay, all right, so all the licenses are in place. Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Those are my questions, Chair Edson, thank you.
Okay, there were no public comments on the consent calendar. Are there any questions from any other board members on this agenda item? Seeing no hands raised, I will make a motion to approve agenda item 19. May I have a second?
Jenkins will second.
Second by Jenkins, motion by Edson. Anthony, please call the vote.
On the motion of Board Chair Joel Edson, seconded by Board Member Sharon Jenkins, to approve amendment number 1 to job order agreement number 21009-003 with Exmon Development Inc. for Oceanside right-of-way fencing. Board Vice Chair Bapatal, how do you vote?
Aye. Oh, I said aye. I'm sorry if it didn't come through. Aye.
Thank you, ma'am. Board Member Gassaland,
I'm going to abstain based on having abstained previously on a vote on this job order.
Board Member Hensy. Board Member Morosco.
Aye.
Board Member Rodriguez. Board Member Desmond. Board Member Jenkins.
Yes.
Board Chair Edson.
Yes.
Board Member Contreras.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay, thank you. Next on our agenda is the Executive Director's Report. Matt?
Yes, thank you, Board Chair. Just a couple of quick items. I wanted to share that the American Public Transportation Association Rail Conference will be in San Diego from June 5th to the 8th. I'm going to ask Anthony to send out the conference program. There are going to be lots of good discussion topics at this conference to include discussions looking at best practice for grade separation projects, both at home, within the US and overseas, plus lots of information about technologies, including zero emission rail vehicle technologies, as well as information related to increased rail funding. I will be moderating the panel with the Federal Railroad Administration key leadership staff. And much of that discussion is going to pivot around the increased funding that has been made available from the infrastructure bill. So I wanted to make sure board members were aware of that. Anthony will send that information out. If you do desire to attend that meeting, you will need to be registered, and NCTD's team staff will assist you in getting you registered. I also wanted to just mention first and express support, appreciation, pardon me, for the board members and the city staff and county staff that have been working with us on the voluminous number of letters of support that we have been requesting across the infrastructure program, the mega program, and the NOLO. I do want to just make a note for you all, because I'm sure some of this stuff kind of gets blurred, but our NOLO bus request is probably going to be one of the most significant requests for funding that program has received. We've decided to double down, and we're asking for funding for 40 plus hydrogen buses. And so everybody crossed their fingers and toes for us in that process. Again, as we talked about budget, but one of the key ways to free up dollars from our budget is to get capital funding from other sources. And that's why we've been so proactive in terms of seeking discretionary funding that has been made available. So I wanted to share those two things with you all. Finally, I will just mention, I've gotten some feedback from some of the coastal communities related to quiet zones. I've asked one of our key team members to develop a scope of work. We're going to develop a scope of work for both the coastal corridor and the inland rail corridor to do a high-level study and analysis of quiet zone implementation. We're going to look at it both from a programmatic point of view and a site-by-site perspective. As you are aware, we don't actually construct and build them, but what we want to share is the state of the current regulatory environment and show the differences when communities approach it on a programmatic, coordinated level versus one-by-one projects done by each city alone. There's a noticeable difference in terms of the cost and the speed and the efficiency. So I know there's lots of information and requests out there related to this topic. So we are going to conduct that study, and we're going to make that information available to all of our North County cities who may be on that journey of looking at quiet zones. So I wanted to share those three things with that. Back to you, Madam Chair.
Well, thank you, Matt. I really appreciate that report out, and I'm excited about APTA in San Diego. Unfortunately, I think it falls on a board meeting for me. So maybe, hopefully all the good stuff is on Monday because I can make it then. Also, the information about quiet zones. I think it's very timely. I know we've had a lot of communication from, for example, the city of Encinitas, and there's some folks there that would really like to learn more about how we can perhaps help them make this happen, or teach them how to make this happen, provide that information. So next on the agenda are board member reports. I attended LoSAN, and I'm happy to report that in March, they had the highest ridership since the beginning of the pandemic, and look to be on track to exceed 200,000 monthly riders. So that's pretty exciting news. It looks like we're bouncing back, and I intend to take the train to LA on Sunday. So I'm going to add to that ridership. Just saying. I don't see any other hands raised at this time. Anthony, do we have any remaining public speakers?
We do not, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. The next scheduled meetings are MISBDA on May 31st, 2022 at 10 a.m. and the regular board meeting June 16th, 2022 at 2 p.m. This meeting is adjourned. Thanks, everyone.